Hello and welcome back to the Mastery of the Minds podcast, where I'm going to discover and explain a few books here and there. My name is Juggin and I'm a current master's student just trying to spread some knowledge of many of the books I've read throughout my entire life. So, if you remember the last episode talks about the obstacle is the way, this first part of acting. And so the obstacle is the way has three parts. It has perception, it has action, and it has will. So the obstacle is the way talks about how our action may be impeded, but there can be no way to impede our disposition of the action, how we can accommodate everything, and how we can push past it. Remember that the obstacle becomes the way. The impediment to acting becomes the action itself. So the first part, last episode, talks up until where it is important to do your job and do it right. Because duty is beautiful, inspiring, and empowering. It brings out a certain amount of joy inside of you that responsibility and obligations have only the power of bringing. So, it's like, as opposed to while I did talk about the idea of making sure you have journey before destination and make sure you're doing the right thing, it's important to understand that it's not about this right way that follows the moralistic code to the absolute T. It's about the right way, which is also the way that works. And those two seem at ends. But there is a good common medium to find, where you do not sacrifice everything, but you do not stick to so many standards with so much rigidity that you lose any sense of what you have to do. So, you have to focus on making do with what you have. You cannot conjure up any sort of new ideology or new set of data for you to work with, or new set of conditions for you to work with. You have to accept and see what you have, and you have to look for the results as well. Not necessarily the pretty methods that will be the most perfect and the most created. It's important that you should value the journey, but it's important to learn from each step you take. Not for making sure your step is clear of any obstructions or anything. And yeah, you're gonna maybe have to be a little more cunning or conniving than comfortable. You're gonna have to start thinking like a pragmatist, like a radical pragmatist. You have to be ambitious and aggressive, even though those two qualities are seen by society as something that is not the most positive. You're gonna have to be more ambitious and aggressive than you think. But you're also going to have to stay eminently practical and make sure you do not break certain rules that you have for yourself and certain moralistic codes that you have for yourself. It doesn't mean choose one of practicality, brutal utilitarian politics, but it doesn't mean staying so moral that you lose out on everything that you stand for. There is a good and a happy medium to be had in the midst of the two. So, what comes to this idea of being a conniving or cunning pragmatist is the flank attack. So when you're at your wit's end, when you're cornered and you don't have anything else, you can go around the problem and you can find leverage to address the problem in of itself. So the most powerful strategists, the masters of the art of strategy, only choose to exert force that is very, very calculated, where it's effective, instead of struggling and straining and trying to bull their way through a problem. There are times where you're going to have to push through, but it's important to analyze your battleground, analyze the field with which you are playing, and push accordingly. It's masters, they will only push at a certain point. They will not continually push and burn themselves out, because there's energy that can be conserved and properly channeled in order to use the best of action. So, when we are cornered, when we are at a low point, we usually tend to subvert the ego, the one that stands in the way of a lot of the things we do. And it forces us to be creative and find a new method or a new way of addressing a situation. You look for this common ground. You look for this leverage. And you look at it through a brutal, pragmatic, and objective view. The way that works may not be the most impressive. It's not the one that lets you trumpet along the vast things with a red carpet that lets you get to your end result. And sometimes it may feel unfair and guilt-inducing. Sometimes it isn't. Because the longest way around can sometimes be the shortest way home. Sometimes the longest way around has some of the ways that you need to, some of the things you need to go through in order to get home. And that's what Paulo Coelho talks about in The Alchemist. He talks about how the boy, to find the treasure, had to subvert and had to go through a massive journey to find, or potentially find, where it lies. And so, once you've established this idea of the flank attack, you can also understand you can use obstacles against themselves. Sometimes non-action can be the kind of action you need to do. Sometimes you can just let other people absorb, use their power, and all you gotta do is just absorb it. Sometimes we need action. Sometimes we need restraint. And sometimes we need patience, or less of yourself. Because to act isn't necessarily to continually move forward and push yourself to the best of your ability. Forward isn't always the best way. It requires the strategy and the humility to understand that the traditional way isn't always, or isn't necessarily, the real way, or the best way. Because the more the opponents fight, the more tired they will get. The more they will use Murphy's Law, which is the idea that if something is meant to go wrong, it's going to go wrong. And rather, the more time you spend in something, the higher the chance of something going wrong. And remember that the harder you fight, more often than not, the less you will achieve. I think there is a good amount, you should understand the amount of force you should be able to put in to an action in order to result with the best. It's kind of like the 80-20 rule. Sometimes, for the most part, to do 80% of the work will require 20% of your energy, but to do the remaining 20% work will require 80% of your energy. So it's important to leverage it and understand where to stop as well. That goes into the idea of channeling your energy. So you have to be physically loose but mentally tight. So you have to remember to look at the bigger picture through your mental tightness. Look and use restraint more than action. Because by being physically loose and being dynamic in the world around us, but staying mentally tight and observing the scenario in an objective view, as is talked about in perception, you tune out these external stressors. You tune out these limitations. You tune out the world that tries to bring you down. And all you see is an objective reality of what you must do. Remember that adversity, it can harden you, but it can also loosen you up and make you better. It just depends on how you perceive it and how you act upon it. Remember that external factors influence the path, but not the direction. External factors can influence the way or the overall carpet that is placed out for you. But it doesn't necessarily influence the direction. Because forward is not, like I said, not always the best way to go about it. Sometimes it's important to sit and wait for events to conspire around you. Or it's important to let other people act and act accordingly in the scheme of grand strategy. And so, like I said, while it is important sometimes, you can choose the offensive. And the thing is, the offensive is associated with a lot of factors like moving forward, pushing everything you have into it. But the offensive is more grand strategy. It's more of looking at the whole battlefield and realizing what the most thing to do to push yourself forward. It's about pressing forward when everyone else seeks disaster. Because a crisis will give you the opportunity for you to do things that you could not before. A low point will allow you to see something objectively that you could not see before. And you have to use a destructive event for change. You have to use a misfortune, sometimes even a tragedy, to your advantage, because that'll be the way you can catapult yourself into greatness. Because that is when the obstacle really becomes the way. And the final thing is prepare for none of it to work. You cannot control the world around you. Nothing will really stop you from trying to control what you can. What blocks your path will give you a new one, will open a new path, an even new part of you. Because sometimes some things will just not work. And we can be the people who will try to do what you can and accept it instantly and move on to what is next. Or you can be the person that will wallow in misery about their victimhood and their misfortune. This is part 2 of Action of Obstacle is the Way. Tune in next week to hear part 3, which is about will. And if you like my content, be sure to drop me a follow at Mastery the Minds on Instagram and TikTok, and follow this podcast if you want to hear more. Thank you, and see you next time.